We're going to start this puppy up. Clear, drop. And welcome back to Tip of the Week, or should we say Ambulance Conversion Part 2. Well, got to update you on the progress we've made in demolition since last time when we introduced this machine. So come on in and let's take a look. Now, so that we don't forget what the interior looked like before we tore it apart, we took some pictures so that we can make a before and after comparison. This is looking on the passenger side, and down here we have the left or driver's side of the interior module. Notice those nice cabinets. Well, now let's take a look at it. Peering inside the door. Notice the cabinets are gone, the chair is gone. And so what's really interesting is to take a closer examination and see what the internal construction of this looks like up close. And by the way, I left part of the ceiling on so we could see before and after to get an idea of how things attached. Looking at the side wall, I left in some of the insulation to show you what they had placed in here. Basically a high-grade styrofoam. I pulled that out so we could look at the wall itself. Here's our 1.5 by 1.5 aluminum square tubes. Think of them as your studs of the wall, 1/8 inch thick, and then the outer skin, I would guess that's about 63 thousandths aluminum sheet. Nice and thick. That's incredibly sturdy. And this is all welded together, and they have caulked at the joints. Here's an example of our electrical outlet. Down here, and they use this cord, rubberized cord, for feeding the 115 volt outlet. Also note that they installed what I call these hard points. Now this is a 1/4 inch aluminum plate that was welded in and gives some strength for what, I'm not sure. Down here, and I know it doesn't look shiny, but this is also 1/4 inch aluminum plate that is threaded, and our seatbelt attachments were here, so it's pretty clear why they reinforced this section. So it just makes for an incredibly strong structure with all of this very heavy aluminum. Here is one of the many lights which will probably keep, disable, or at least change the lens color. Got to get the red and the blues out of there, so we can either keep or cover this up. And also notice the spacing of the studs are not consistent. They range from 16 inch to 24 and things in between. So for various reasons they chose different dimensions for placing them. Above the door here, now back in the day, 1999, we didn't have high-powered LEDs, so this is a halogen, a 750 watt halogen, which runs off of the 115 volts, and there's one on each side. This one is above the door, so we can, I will remove that and probably put in a nice LED entryway light. And again, more reinforcement or hard points. This is all 1/4 inch aluminum plate. Down here. At the very front, of course, we have our passageway here. Now I'm going to increase its size. Can't go up because of the cab roof ends there, but we can go down another foot or two and make this larger so that a person can pass through without any trouble. Above here are the lights, again, which we can either keep or cover up as necessary. And again, notice the stud spacing in this case is a little bit wider. Not a lot of consistency to that. And then looking over to our wall over here, we get an appreciation of the electrical that was in place behind the wall. So most of these cables are for the lights. There's lots of lights. We've seen a few of them. And then other cables are for the 115 volt outlets that are in one on each wall. And then don't forget the halogen lights up there. So we have a combination of low voltage and high voltage. All of this will be removed. I'll keep a few, and I'll explain that in a moment. But do notice that there is plenty of capacity within these wall cavities to place wires or pipes for water. One of these is also the oxygen tube, and we'll be pulling that out. And moving back to the rear, you may or may not remember that in this area right here was the air conditioning unit, and that's what this opening was for, the venting of the air conditioning unit. So that was completely taken out. Let's take a look at it. It's on the floor now. Now that was quite heavy. That was somewhere between 100 and 200 pounds. That is a 15,000 BTU air conditioner, which is way overkill for this tiny 8 by 12 space in this ambulance. They clearly wanted to create a refrigerator type cooling scenario in here. I guess patients had to be kept cold, but that is just tremendous capacity. It clearly was not suitable for use because of the space, the power it takes, and the fact that it was just way too much. By the way, let's take a quick look at all of the cabinets that were removed. They're all sitting here. They're all aluminum, although they're very heavy aluminum and quite heavy, all things considered. Here's a closer look at them. They just were tremendously well built. I think each one of these is well over 50 pounds. They're quite heavy. If I can end up using any of these in the RV conversion, I will, but clearly they were not in the right spot or performed the proper function the way they were, so they came out. The last thing we should take note of, which I find fascinating, is their ceiling. Now, I left part of it up. Basically, this is just paneling board, masonite type backed. Here's the fixtures in place, and on the other side is what it looks like without any of this in place. Note that the ceiling is very conducive of running wires and cables, so everything can be run in any direction. The ceiling is also aluminum square tubing. It's just that they've covered it up with this reflective foil with no insulation above. Now clearly this foil could be considered a radiant barrier. Below the vapor barrier, certainly it's performing that function, they used wood furring strips, which are incredibly strong, well attached, I guess is what I'm saying, to the aluminum. They're rock solid, which makes it very nice to be able to put another ceiling in place on it and still have room forever for your cables, because there's a continuous channel over the entire ceiling, if you think of it that way, because of that inch space between the aluminum and with the furring strips. And there are some hard points where the rails, handrails were kept up there, so everything is very, very strong up here. Now, when I take down all these wires, it's going to be easy to either save the wires or put the new ones in to go exactly where I want them to. So in other words, I can get from any point on any wall to any other point by using the ceiling. And that's going to be very nice. And especially if I put in a ceiling that allows me to take down a panel or two, I can get back at the cables for lighting, placement, etc. I should point out that the original designers also used this bubble wrap with one side reflective in about 50% of the ambulance. So 50% was this styrofoam, which filled it up, and the other half was crammed with this stuff. So it's almost like they couldn't quite make up their mind. Now certainly we have a radiant barrier with the reflective, but if you're going to use it that way, you want an air gap. You don't just want to cram it in a spot like this. The bubble wrap itself has no real R value to speak of, so clearly they were maybe searching for the best way to go. Keep in mind this came from Texas, where tremendous heat on the outside we want to stop from coming in, which may not be the same design goal for someone building an RV, where typically it may be cool outside and you're trying to keep slightly warmer air on the inside. We'll talk about that later when we think about the best way to create insulation for this. And also keeping in mind that we only have 1.5 inches, but still we would like some sound deadening for sure, and some R value, not just some bubble wrap in there, and whether or not the radiant barrier is important for us. Now we have to mention the floor. The floor was covered with a masonite sheet, pretty thick one, I'd say at least 1/2 inch, more than that actually, and then vinyl sheet goods that was taken out. The problem is that water had gotten in there, and that masonite was nearly completely soaked up with live, wet moisture and had swollen and made the floor lumpy. We took that all out. I found the source of the leak, but what I just love is, had this been a steel floor, water having sat there for all that time would have just destroyed the floor with rust and whatnot. After more than 20 years, this aluminum floor is still quite usable. We'll clean up some of the slight corrosion spots here and there, but it is still solid and has another 20 years or longer to go. You just can't beat aluminum for its strength and just durability from the elements as far as wearing out. Now, of course, I'm going to plan on putting some insulation down. We'll talk about that later, because as an RV, the only thing separating you from 30 degrees outside, you want more than just a thin sheet of aluminum down there. So we're going to put some insulation and some flooring, and we'll talk about that later. But from a demolition standpoint, we ripped out all of the masonite and the sheet goods, and we're down to bare metal, aluminum metal. So before we go outside and take a look at what we did there, I want to point out that all of these boxes are aluminum boxes which make up the storage units that we're going to look at and gain access from the outside. So everything is aluminum, and we can't take out things like this or the ones in the corner, because we want to maintain our storage lockers that we access from outside. So that'll remain. So basically we're looking at the free space we have available for building on the inside. And other than finishing off, removing the rest of the ceiling, we're basically done. And by the way, these were 12-volt fluorescent lights, and of course we'll take those out. And when we plan our build, of course, they will be some sort of LED, low power consumption lighting. Here's the electrical panel that we started on. I removed quite a bit of components so far, though it may look like I still have a ways to go. But the nice thing was the ability to start to identify what some of these things were. and where they went. 115 volt panel supply, and the rest of this was for 12 volt running the lights and the air compressors and sirens, on and on and on. Here's a board I removed, which has plenty of components I can reuse if I so desire. So before long I'll have this all cleaned out so that we can start over and put in the systems we want. Now, of course, the analysis I spent was to identify cables that came from the engine compartment, in other words, the battery and stuff, so I don't want to mess with them. Those are already routed, but everything else that has no purpose will be taken out. The wire will be saved and reused where possible. Now, here are some of the components that were removed. Right here we have this is heavy, this is the 12 volt power supply that was used to create 12 volts from the 115 when the unit was plugged in. 85 amps of 12 volts. So that'll be interesting. We'll probably keep that for some future projects. A vacuum pump, a charger, and then, aren't these fun? These are the Whelen power supplies for the lights, for the flashing lights. Got 1, 2, 3 of them. Probably set those on eBay. I don't think they're worth very much anymore. But they made all the flashing lights do their things. And here's another one, electronic flasher. So we're collecting a bunch of probably not too useful components. I mean, some of them are going to be very useful, but some of the flashing stuff. And of course there's no free rides, meaning that there's always other stuff that needs to be fixed. You find out after the purchase, but I have one of the wheels pulled off, and you're looking here at the air suspension. This is an airbag. One went bad. I'm going to replace both of them. Here's one that's already been replaced, but when the onboard compressor starts up, this lifts the suspension and raises and carries the back half of the truck. So we're on an air ride suspension. And this was modified, right? The ambulance manufacturer removed all of the Chevy rear suspension, all of the leaf springs, everything. And there's companies that make third-party truck suspensions, and this is one of them. Notice the massive bar there that looks like a backward S that holds the bottom of the air spring. That took the place of all of the regular leaf springs and supports the airbag. And that's how the suspension works. And after more than 20 years, of course, a rubber product is going to wear out and leak. So that's not a problem. And, of course, 20-year-old plus vehicle, I found quite a few leaks underneath the engine, the transmission. You know, so everything drips when rubber seals and rubber items get old, they crack. That's just the way rubber works. Remember, this is 1999, so this is going to be 24 years old coming up. So with the good comes the bad. Older vehicles always have issues and problems, but nothing that can't be either lived with or repaired. Take your time. So that was just a brief update of where we're at. We're going to continue stripping things down. Got to get all those wires out of there. And then once it's back to bare bones, we can plan on what it is we'd like to build it into. And further, we'll discuss why the construction of something like this has great value over or compared to your traditional RV structure. We'll kind of compare and contrast it, because until you're sold on the value of what this type of construction brings you, it won't really make sense that someone would take the time and expense to redo or reuse something like this for the purpose of an RV. So we'll see you next time.